and we really encourage you to make sure you attend one of those portions as well. Today, we're going to be covering a series of topics, including giving an overview of the new assessment and how it'll be used, talking about how support levels and service mixes are assigned, discussing the process of verification review and explaining what verification flagging is, talking about how a participant's budget is determined, and explaining model mixes, which is part of the way that that budget is decided. We'll describe some new types of budget modifications, talk about the impact of the public health emergency and the American Rescue Plan, talk about a new concept known as mid-year plans, and then describe 3 different reasons why someone may need a mid-year plan, including a change in condition, a service mix change request, or an off-cycle verification request. We'll end our time together by walking through some service-specific changes and quickly overviewing the array of services available to participants who use the traditional program. To get us started, let's start with a little background around why we're even starting with a new budget model. As I'm sure all of you are well aware, there was a class action lawsuit filed in Idaho that's known as KW v. Armstrong. In that lawsuit, the court said that the existing budget tool violated adults' due process rights because of its unreliability. As a result, the department and class counsel, the American Civil Liberties Union, entered a settlement agreement back in 2016. Under that settlement agreement, the department agreed to change the way it determines budgets for adults in the DD program. This presentation explains those changes as well as other related changes the department is making. As a way to organize this presentation, we've broken it up along the key steps that participants engage in order to receive adult DD services. All participants every single year need to do the vast majority of these steps. The first for most participants is that assessment piece. Once they've completed their assessment, they then will get their budget in a budget notice, which will tell them the dollars they have available to make a plan. They will then work with a plan developer and their team to develop a plan for the supports and services they'd like to receive in the coming year, and then will begin to get those services. Now, lots of participants will get their services all year, and then when it comes time for their next assessment, start the process again. However, for some individuals, there may be a need to make changes during the year, and that is a possibility that's available that can include changing the services themselves or even changing broader things like the way you're getting services overall or the program you're using, like traditional to self-direction. There's one additional step that comes into play for initial applicants. That is the application itself. Only participants who are entering the program for the first time need to complete the application, and we'll start by describing a few changes to the application in alignment with the new model. So there was really only one minor change made to the adult DD application in preparation for the move to the new budget model. It's identified by this arrow here on the slide. As you can see, a question is asked on the application of what services are you seeking? There are 3 possible answers. First is DD Waiver Traditional. The second is DD Waiver Self-Directed. And the third is State Plan HCBS Services. This is the box that changed, and it now identifies the full list of services available to participants who are seeking State Plan HCBS. It includes service coordination, community habilitation, which is a new service, developmental therapy, and non-medical transportation. The application is what helps determine which path the independent assessment contractor, or Liberty, follows when making that initial eligibility determination. It is important that applicants understand what each of these boxes truly mean and how it could impact the services that they receive. Only those individuals who apply for the DD waiver can receive DD waiver services, even if they would otherwise qualify to receive such services. So someone could apply to the program and for the time being may only know to seek or may only be wanting to receive developmental therapy. So they may just check this box since the only service they're looking to receive is that developmental therapy. A few years down the road, their circumstances may change and they may decide that they need some additional supports, maybe to move into supported living. Because that person only applied at their initial application for developmental therapy, they did not complete an application that includes the ability to get DD waiver services. Therefore, when they want to add certified family home or supported living to their plan in a few years, the process of making that change will be a little bit more complex. It's still absolutely possible so long as they meet the eligibility requirements. But we really recommend that if a person is applying for services and they think they may be eligible for the DD waiver or think that they may want to seek DD waiver services in the future, that they go ahead and check one of the DD waiver boxes to identify whether or not they are eligible, which gives them more flexibility to add services to their plan as just by identifying participant receives any DD waiver services. They can still, while being eligible for the DD waiver, choose to only get developmental therapy if that's all that they're seeking at the time. It just offers a little more flexibility and the ability for folks to know what they could be eligible for into the future. So, why would folks receive or seek HCBS Estate Plan only? One of the reasons is that a person does not meet the requirements to receive DD waiver services, and we'll talk about those requirements in a moment. The second option is a person just did not apply to receive DD waiver services. Therefore, they're only going to receive those HCBS Estate Plan services. The third possibility are individuals who are seeking services or are already receiving services through another waiver, such as the Aging and Disabled waiver. As a result, they may only access HCBS Estate Plan services from this program. DD waiver services are available to all individuals who meet the requirements for ICF-ID level of care. Individuals who receive DD waiver services can also receive those HCBS Estate Plan services. Individuals who are eligible for the DD Estate Plan can choose to receive those services using traditional or a self-directed waiver option. On traditional, participants just choose an eligible provider to help administer the services that they have selected. On self-direction, participants independently hire the community support workers, or CSWs, they want to provide their services. This program comes with additional flexibility and additional choices in the services and supports that are received, but also comes with additional responsibilities on the part of the participant. Before we dig into the main first step for the majority of participants each year, that assessment, I'll pause quickly and see if any questions have come up. I'll note that folks can enter your questions into chat. You also can raise your hand and our host can unmute you to ask your question verbally if that is preferable.
At this point, Alina, I am not seeing any hands raised nor any questions in the chat.
All right, very good. Well, let's keep plugging right along then. So currently, individuals in the DD program receive the SIB-R to determine their eligibility and to determine their budgets. Moving forward, 2 new assessments will be used to perform these tasks. The Vineland 3 will be replacing the SIB-R to help identify program eligibility and to determine ICF-ID level of care. The Supports Intensity Scale Adult, or Sysa, is replacing the SIB-R and the Inventory of Needs to help determine that annual budget. The new budget model requires a valid and reliable assessment of support need in order to operate. The Sysa was chosen to be that assessment by a work group that included both department staff and external advocates. A number of tools were reviewed during that process, and the group identified the tool that they felt would both meet the requirements of the department while also adhering to the requests of stakeholders to have a strengths-based tool that they felt was less offensive or problematic for participants. The new assessment tools are set to go live on June 1st of 2022. However, that date may change as we still are awaiting final approval from CMS. Now, all plans are in place and systems are a go for that June 1st go live date. However, if approval from CMS comes later than that, the department will let all stakeholders know that the date of going live could be delayed beyond June 1st. What that means is that starting on June 1st in our current plans, Individuals receiving assessments in preparation for their next plan year will receive a Vineland 3 and a supports intensity scale in order to make a plan using the new budget. Another thing you should know with regard to assessments and the beginning of the new model is the need for a revised assessment schedule. Typically, participants only receive a full assessment every 3 years. In the intervening years, participants receive a focused review just to identify if anything major has changed in their condition or needs. During implementation, all participants will receive a Tscs and a Vineland 3 in just about 1 year to allow folks to move into the new model. However, the workload associated with conducting a full assessment is much more than that for a focused review. It includes more time and more interaction and a need to convene a larger group of people in order to conduct the assessment process. As a result, it'll be necessary to redivide participants into 3 groups so that 1/3 of participants will receive a full assessment each year and the other 2/3 will receive that focused review. As a result, the department will be dividing participants into 3 groups, Group A, Group B, and Group C. All participants in all groups will be receiving a full assessment during the implementation year, so 2022 to 2023. Following implementation year, 1/3 of participants, so the participants in Group A, will get another full assessment. They will then have 2 years of focused reviews before getting an additional full assessment in 2026 to 2027. Participants in Group B will also get that full assessment this year, will then have a focused review next year in 2023 to 2024, and then will receive an additional full assessment. They then will be back on schedule and can have 2 years of focused reviews before getting their next full assessment in 2027 to 2028. Participants who are in Group C will stick on a schedule very similar to what folks normally receive. They'll receive that full assessment during implementation, will then have 2 years of focused reviews, and then have their next full assessment in 2025 to 2026. Participants will be assigned to groups at random with one exception, and that is participants who volunteered to conduct a practice Sysa to support Liberty assessors in finishing their training on the Sysa will be placed into Group C as a thank you for participating and volunteering to complete those assessments. Those individuals have just pretty recently had a Sysa and will need another Sysa during the implementation period, which is why they will be assigned to that group. Participants who have a change in condition will receive a full assessment as soon as it is needed, irrespective of which group that they have been assigned to. And any new participants who enter into the program will receive a full assessment on that regular 3-year cycle. Now let's talk in a little more detail about one of the assessments being used under the new model, the Vineland 3. Assessors and respondents will review and discuss the adaptive behaviors of a participant in the following areas: communication, daily living skills, socialization, motor skills, and maladaptive behaviors. In order to be eligible for the DD program, an individual must be an adult, 18 years or older, must have a qualifying diagnosis that was made before the age of 22, must include documentation around that diagnosis. Diagnoses include things like intellectual disability, autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, or other closely related conditions. They also must have a substantial limitation in at least three major life activities. This is the piece of eligibility that is determined with the help of the Vineland. The areas of major life activity include self-care, receptive and expressive language, learning, mobility, self-direction, capacity of independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. Again, a participant needs to have a substantial limitation in 3 of these areas in order to qualify for the program. Any adult who meets DD program eligibility and is financially eligible for Medicaid is then able to receive state plan HCBS services. Eligibility for the program equals eligibility to receive those state plan services. So how is the Vineland used to determine that someone has those substantial limitations in at least 3 major areas? On this chart here, you can see the crosswalk between each major life area and the exact Vineland scores that are used to determine whether or not a substantial limitation exists. I'll review one as an example. So for self-care, you'll see that a V-scale score of less than or equal to 10 from the personal subdomain of the Vineland 3 would equal a substantial limitation. So this individual would then have a substantial limitation in one area, self-care. Again, an individual needs to have a substantial limitation in at least 3 of these areas in order to qualify for the program. For the sake of time, I'm not going to walk through each of these criteria. However, these will be published in Rule, and this slideshow will be made available after this presentation for you to review at your leisure. The Vineland 3 is also utilized to help identify that a participant meets ICF ID level of care. In order to receive waiver services, a participant must meet all of the DD program eligibility requirements, must require active treatment, and must meet one of the following criteria in order to show that they meet ICF ID level of care. That is a functional need, a behavioral need, a combination of a functional and behavioral need, or a medical need. The functional needs and behavioral needs, in order to establish that someone meets ICF ID level of care, are also determined using the Vineland 3. For example, a participant who meets the program eligibility requirements and requires active treatment, who has a Vineland 3 adaptive behaviors composite score less than 55, would meet the functional requirements to meet ICF ID level of care. A participant could meet under behavioral if they had a maladaptive internal or external score greater than or equal to 21, or if they had a maladaptive internal or external score less than 21, and they engage in aggressive or self-injurious behaviors. Again, for the sake of time, I won't read the rest of these different optional criteria. The real takeaway for you to know is that for a participant to receive waiver services, they must have applied to receive waiver services, they must be eligible for the DD program, they must require active treatment, and they must meet ICF ID level of care requirements. Participants who are eligible for waiver services can then select whether they would like to receive those services using traditional or self-direction. The next assessment we'll talk about is the Tscs. Again, the Tscs is what's used to help identify a participant's budget using the new model. The adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities are always invited and encouraged to take part in the Tscs interview. However, they are not required to do so if they do not want to. There is a requirement that at least 2 people who know the adult well and understand his or her support needs are present for the entire interview. It is the adult's choice who takes part in that Tscs interview. The Tscs has 3 overarching areas. The first is around exceptional medical and behavioral support needs. The second is called the Support Needs Index, and the third is the Protection and Advocacy Scale. 3 portions of Section 2 of the Tscs are what are utilized to identify the general support needs that will place a participant into levels 1, 2, or 3. Those areas are Area 2A, Home Living, 2B, Community Living, and 2E, Health and Safety Activities. This is often referred to as ABE. Section 1 of the Tscs, around medical and behavioral support needs, as well as the supplemental questions, are utilized to help identify participants who are likely to meet the criteria for levels M or B, those levels specifically designated for participants who have extraordinary medical or extraordinary behavioral support needs. In order to get to a support level, a participant needs to complete the Tscs. Once the Tscs is completed, you can then be assigned to levels 1, 2, or 3, dependent on those scores. Each participant is assigned to only one level, and as you can see here, of a score between 8 and 22, a standard ABE score will assign a participant to level 1, which is for individuals who have relatively low support needs. A standard ABE score between 23 and 30 will result in a participant being assigned to level 2, which is for individuals who have moderate support needs. And a standard ABE score of 31 to 52 will result in a participant being assigned to level 3 for participants who have relatively high support needs. Levels M and B are assigned exclusively based on a verified need, and we'll talk about that verification process here in a moment. There is a potential that a participant could meet the criteria for both levels M and B, and if that were the case, they would be assigned to the level that is the primary driver of their extraordinary support need. One thing to remember is that each participant is only assigned to one level. What that means is that if Michael had an ABE score of 29 and had an extraordinary behavioral support need that met the verified criteria, he would be assigned to level B, despite also meeting the criteria for level 2. If a participant meets the criteria for more than one level, they will be assigned to the greatest level, which is reflective of their support need. Before I turn our attention to digging further into how a participant gets into levels M or B, I will pause again to see if we have any questions.
I am seeing no questions in the chat and no hands raised.
All right. So all participants are eligible to receive or to request consideration for levels M or B. The process of requesting that consideration is known as verification review and is very similar to the current intense review process. Participants will be asked during the assessment if they believe they meet the criteria for levels M or B and whether or not they would like to pursue verification review. In order to be verified for level M, a participant must meet the following criteria. They must have a chronic or acute medical condition, which is complex, unstable, or both. They must require one-to-one staffing to provide frequent intervention and constant monitoring for all or substantial portions of the day. And without such intervention and monitoring, the individual would need to require placement in a nursing facility, hospital, or ICF ID. One note on this slide, you'll see there is an Idapa citation included. This Idapa citation will be relevant once the new record is put forward here in the coming months. So if you were to go and search this citation right now in Idapa, it would likely not connect you to the criteria for level M. However, we went ahead and included this citation so you have it for reference once we get to implementation of the new model. Now let's turn our attention to the criteria available for assignment to level B. It looks slightly more complex because there are multiple ways that a participant may be able to receive access to level B. However, there is one consistent element for all of the different opportunities to receive this level, and that is requiring one-to-one staffing to provide frequent intervention and consistent monitoring for at least 16 hours a day in order to prevent the behavior at issue. In addition to that requirement, which exists for all of these different possibilities, a participant could be assigned to this level if they have a pending felony charge related to the serious injury or harm of another person, if they are on probation for a recent felony conviction related to the harm or serious injury of another person, if they are on parole from incarceration related to the serious injury or harm from another person, if they've been released for time served from incarceration for a felony conviction related to the serious injury or harm of another person, if they have a history of predatory sexual activity, and whether they have been adjudicated with regard to such behavior or simply exhibit the kind of behavior that is of a nature that could result in a conviction. They must also be at a high risk to reoffend based on a sexual offender risk assessment, which had been completed by an appropriate professional within the last 3 years. Or a person could be assigned to level B if they have a history of serious aggressive behavior, which could include causing harm to themselves or others, and that history is such that they are able to carry out a threat, and do have the capacity to harm another person or themselves. Again, as a reminder, for any of these different criteria, there is this secondary requirement of that need for one-on-one staffing to provide intervention and monitoring to prevent the behavior for at least 16 hours a day. Participants may be flagged for verification review based on their responses to the Tscs and the supplemental questions, as I mentioned earlier. Flagging simply means that we've identified that this participant may be more likely to meet the criteria for level M or B. A participant who flags is not required to go through verification review and can decline to do so if they do not believe they will meet the requirement or do not wish to go through the process. The criteria for level M flagging is as follows. A response of 1 to 1 or more items in section 1A of the Tscs, a response of yes to the supplemental medical question, and an indication of a need of 84 support hours a week for extraordinary medical support. The criteria for flagging for level B includes a response of a 1 to 1 or more items in section 1B of the Tscs, a response of yes to the behavioral supplemental question, and a need for 84 hours of support per week for extraordinary behavioral support needs. Participants can also flag based on a combined need for levels M and B. This can be due to a response of 1 to at least 1 item in both sections 1A and 1B of the Tscs, a response of yes to both supplemental questions, and a need for 84 hours of support due to their combined needs around medical and behavioral. Individuals who request verification review, and this includes both those individuals who flag and those individuals who do not, will be provided the verification questionnaire and told to submit that questionnaire along with any supporting documentation within 14 days of the assessment. Individuals can also request verification review at any point during the plan year, although we highly recommend they go ahead and make that request at the time of their assessment. And those participants who do not request verification will be assigned to levels 1, 2, or 3 based on their Tscs scores. This verification questionnaire is a new document. It will allow an opportunity for participants to identify exactly what they are seeking verification for, and includes recommendations of the kinds of documentation necessary to establish an extraordinary medical or extraordinary behavioral support need. This slide provides some examples of documentation that a participant may submit in order to show they meet the criteria for level M or level B. For level M, it includes things like notes from a primary care physician, emergency room reports, fully notated seizure logs, nursing plans, or hospital discharge summaries. For someone seeking level B, it could include things like court orders, sexual risk assessments, incident reports, police reports, behavior management plan data, and other types of legal documents. The verification review team includes a series of professionals, including a clinically licensed behavioral health professional from Liberty, a representative from BDDS Quality Assurance, a representative from BDDS Care Management, a licensed practical or registered nurse, a representative from the FACTS Crisis Prevention Team, a qualified intellectual disabilities professional, and an administrative member. The verification review team determines if a participant meets any of the criteria for level M or B using the verification questionnaire, those documents which are submitted by the participant, as well as records that are maintained by the department. The participant's eligibility and budget notice will include information on the VRT's decision, their rationale, and the documents that they reviewed in order to make that decision. Participants always have the right to appeal decisions by the verification review team. With that, we've walked through the process of assigning folks to a level. The next step is to discuss the process of selecting a service mix, which is the second component necessary to get to a budget. I want to pause for just a moment and see if any questions have come up, and also look for any hands.
Again, at this point, not seeing any questions in the chat and not seeing any raised hands.
All right, we've got a quiet bunch today. We'll keep trucking along. As I said, the next step in the process is selecting a service mix. A service mix is simply a term used to group participants based on the way they choose to receive their supports and the type of residential supports they would like to receive. Participants have the right to change their service mix at any time, with one notable exception. That is, those participants who receive the state plan HCBS only mix can only change that mix if they receive DD waiver eligibility. Because that mix is dedicated to those individuals who are not eligible to receive the DD waiver, the other service mixes are not available to participants within that mix unless they are identified as meeting that eligibility requirement. In order to know which service mix is applicable for a participant, knowing what type of residential habilitation support they would like to receive is the easiest way to go. As I noted, individuals are assigned to the state plan HCBS only service mix if they are only applying for or only qualify for those 1959 adult DD services. Participants will be assigned to the service mix of certified family home if they are on traditional and receive residential habilitation from a certified family home provider. Participants who are on traditional and receive residential habilitation from a supported living provider will be assigned to the supported living service mix, and those traditional participants who receive no in-home habilitation will be assigned to the community-only support service mix. There are also 3 service mixes available to participants who choose to self-direct their services, which we talk about in more detail in the support broker presentation. So in order to get a budget, a participant needs to have 2 elements: a support level, 1, 2, 3, M or B, and a service mix, one of the service mixes we just described. Each support level and service mix combination then has its own model mix. We'll talk about model mixes here in just a second, as a model mix is the way that we come to the budget. A participant also can get services beyond their assigned budget using one of 3 different types of budget modifications. The first is a health or safety service request. The second is a health or safety budget modification request. And the third is an employment-related service request. We will describe and discuss all 3 of these types of budget modifications in a little bit. So model mixes were developed by identifying the average type and amount of service the department anticipates individuals will use within each support level and service mix. Model mixes are then priced out to determine and get to a budget. In this example, you see there are 3 services that the department has identified should comprise an individual's service use. They then identify the average number of units of each service, identify the rate that's applicable for that service, and then add the total cost for a year of Service A, Service B, and Service C together in order to get to the total budget. Once the department arrives at the budget, a participant is not required to use the specific services that are included in that model mix. Those services are simply the mechanism by which we get to the budget. Model mixes also have the ability to be altered over time as needed. This can be done based on evaluation. So if we identified that really no participants in level 1 using community-only supports ever use Service A, then it may make sense to remove Service A from the model mix moving forward. This will be determined based on evaluation. It's also possible to alter the model mix based on changes to the elements themselves. So for example, recently, the legislature identified and approved new rates for some services within this program, including supported living, developmental therapy, and adult day health. The model mixes for the new budget model have been adjusted to account for the new rates that will be in play starting in July of this year, and the total budgets have been altered to account for that new rate to ensure the model mixes are still offering a budget sufficient to procure the level of service the department envisioned. The traditional budgets under the new model are comprised of three components. The first component is residential supports and aligns with the participant's chosen service mix. The second component is discretionary supports and includes a wide array of services that a participant may utilize to fill their time, including their day activities, evening activities, weekend activities. The third section is planning supports. Those supports participant needs in order to build their plan and to maintain their services over the course of the year. Those three components together equal the support budget. Remember, participants can also receive services outside of that budget that are deemed a health, safety, or employment service. Participants can also add additional dollars to the residential component of their budget or the discretionary component of their budget due to an identified and verified health risk or safety risk. This slide shows each of the services available within the traditional service array and which component of the budget it fits into. You'll see, as I mentioned, the residential habilitation portion of the budget has really two options: certified family home or supported living services. Participants who choose not to receive any residential habilitation would be assigned to a community-only mix or to a state plan HCBS mix, depending on their eligibility. The discretionary support section of the budget includes a variety of services, including the three new services that will be made available under the new model: Pre-Vocational Services, Career Planning, and Community Habilitation. It also includes adult day health, developmental therapy, non-medical transportation, and supplemental supported living services for participants who have the supported living service mix. Respite and Chore Service are two services that are available to those participants who do not receive paid residential habilitation services but are waiver eligible. The service coordination and planning portion of the budget includes service coordination and plan development. And then the health, safety, and employment supports. Again, these services can be received outside of the budget by meeting the service-specific criteria, include skilled nursing and nursing oversight, specialized medical equipment and supplies, environmental accessibility adaptations, behavior consultation, home-delivered meals, personal emergency response systems, crisis intervention services, transition services, supported employment, and non-medical transportation, when specifically for the purposes of supported employment. Next, we're going to walk through in detail some of the model mixes. I'm going to start with a caveat, which is we know that these model mixes are a little bit hard to read due to a lot of content on a relatively small slide. As a result, I'm going to quickly just orient you to the mix as a whole. We'll then walk through one detailed example for one support level in one model mix, and then quickly review the other available model mixes. The updated model mixes, which take into account the new rates, will be made available on the My Choice Matters website very shortly. That will offer you an opportunity to look at the model mixes in more detail, to blow them up as big as you would like on your screen, and any specific questions around the model mixes can be directed to the department once you've had a chance to review them yourselves in more detail if they come up. Let's start by taking a quick look at the traditional community-only model mix. Again, let's start by just orienting you to how the model mix is developed. Again, this basic composition is applicable for all model mixes. Moving from left to right, you see that levels increase from level 1, level 2, 3, M, and then B. Down the left-hand side, you see that it is divided by the budget components: the residential budget, the discretionary budget, and the planning budget. Then, within each of these components, you see the list of services that are available. There is also a subtotal for each level for each of the different components of the budget, as well as a total budget for each level across the bottom of the budget. The second column includes the relevant rate for each service, both the rate at an hourly basis and at the 15-minute increment, with the exception of one service, non-medical transportation, which is provided at the mile. Now let's get into a little more detail in the discretionary budget by looking at a bigger example. So for level 1, the discretionary budget under the traditional community-only mix looks as follows. Again, all of the included services are included down this left-hand column. Right next to it, you will see the applicable rate. The next column identifies the number of hours for each given service that were included in the model mix. Again, there is no requirement that a participant utilize this number of hours of that service. It's simply the calculation that was used to come to the budget. So, for a participant in level 1 in a traditional community-only service mix, the department identified that the budget should include sufficient dollars to account for 4 hours a week of adult day health at a cost of $2.79 for each 15-minute increment, or $11.16 an hour, 5 hours a week for developmental therapy, 5 hours a week for developmental therapy community-based, 3 hours a year for developmental therapy evaluation, 1 hour per week for career planning, 3 hours per week for community habilitation individual, 5 hours per week for community habilitation group, and 3,600 miles. By taking the number of hours per week, multiplying it by the number of weeks per year, and specifically for the discretionary budgets, these are done on a 50-week year, accounting for the fact that often the kinds of services that people receive in their discretionary budgets may break for holidays, may not be something someone attends when they are ill, etc. And using a 50-week year is very much common practice in this type of budget calculation. You then multiply the number of hours per week by the number of applicable weeks, multiply that by the relevant rate to get to the total value for that service. In this example, that would be $2,232 for adult day health. You follow that same process for each of the services within the discretionary budget. Following that all along, you then get to the grand total for the discretionary budget for this level and this service mix of $27,955.40. You then add to that the budget for other components of the budget itself. So for a participant receiving traditional community only, the residential portion includes $0 because this person has selected no in-home paid residential supports. The planning portion of the budget includes both plan development at 12 hours per year and service coordination at 54 hours per year. This equals a total of $3,191.76. This portion of the budget is included for all participants who receive traditional services. This, just under $3,200, is the same across all levels, across all service mixes within traditional. You add together these three values, so none for residential because this person selected no in-home paid residential supports, just under $28,000 for discretionary, just over $3,200 for planning, to get to a total budget of $31,146.16. This is the same process that is included across every single mix. The next mix we'll just quickly review is that for certified family home. Again, all of the basic construction is the same. The difference is that in the certified family home mix, there is available dollars for 365 days of support from your certified family home provider. The relevant reimbursement rate for that service is $53.39 a day, which equals just under $20,000 being added to the budget at every single level. Discretionary budgets vary by support level. Planning budget, again, is identical across all levels, and you see that budgets increase as levels increase across the traditional certified family home model mix. Next, we move to the traditional supported living mix. This mix, again, same planning budget across all groups, varying discretionary budget across support levels, as well as varying residential budget. The residential budget at each level accounts for 365 days of the per diem for that specific level of supported living. For example, for supported living level 1, a person has sufficient dollars to purchase 365 days of level 1 supported living. However, a participant is not required to purchase the level of supported living that matches their support level. So, a participant in support level 3 could identify that they actually don't think that they want any individual supported living service. If they made that choice, they could instead purchase level 2 supported living, which is a group service, and would then be assigned to level 3, but would be receiving supported living level 2 on a per diem basis. The final model mix we'll talk through is that Hdb Estate Plan only. The basic construction, again, is the same, with one difference, and that is the discretionary services available has a reduced availability because a number of services are not available to participants in this model mix because those are waiver services. With that, I am going to pause and see if any questions come up around the model mixes before we move into talking about budget modifications.
So we do have one question, and it's actually more back on the assessment component. It came in just after we started talking about the model mixes. Will clients know what review group they are in? That's the first part of that. And what happens if there's only one respondent available for a Tscs?
So participants will know if they've been assigned to Group A, Group B, or Group C at approximately the time that they receive their first Tscs assessment. The department's currently working on the process for how they're going to notify individuals of which group applies, so they have plenty of notice about when they're going to need that next Tscs and Vineland 3. Michael, could you respond to the question regarding what to do if only one respondent is available?
So the two respondent requirement is actually something that is from AAIDD, who are the producers, the developers of the tool. And it's not something that the state has implemented. So first and foremost, we would work with the participant to identify that second respondent in order to make sure that the person has the needed supports and the needed information available. Individuals can be a respondent, but AAIDB suggests, strongly encourages that the two respondents plus the individual be present for the assessment.
Just quickly checking to see if any hands are raised.
I am not seeing any hands, and we have no additional questions in the chat.
All right, well then let's continue and start talking about budget modifications. So again, as I previously described, there are a series of services which are designated as health, safety, and employment services. These services can be obtained by a participant in addition to their available budget by simply meeting the service-specific criteria for that service. We will talk about the service-specific criteria a little bit later in the presentation, but I just wanted to stop quickly here and note that all participants will receive in their new budget notices an attachment as a part of attachment 4, which includes the full list of health, safety, and employment services that are available and the service-specific criteria to use that service. This is being included to allow for participants to have all the information they need to identify exactly what documentation they would need to submit in order to include these types of services on their plan and get them approved. Budget modifications are also available due to health risks or safety risks. On this slide, you see examples of the kinds of documentation that can be submitted to help establish a health risk or a safety risk. They include documentation such as emergency room reports, seizure logs, nursing plans, hospital discharge summaries, etc. For safety risks, they include things such as incident reports, police reports, as well as assessments from licensed practitioners with regard to someone's support needs. Individuals will also receive in their notice a copy of the health risk form and the safety risk form that they would need to submit along with any supporting documentation if they are seeking a budget modification for health risk or safety risk. Again, these are the forms that are utilized if a participant would like to exceed their residential budget or discretionary budget for one of these reasons. Care managers will reach out to plan developers for clarification or to request additional documentation if the budget modification request and documentation fails to show any of the following. For a health risk, the documentation and form must show the health risk the participant is at without the requested service, the specific service that is being requested, how the requested service will address the risk, and documentation from a licensed professional within their scope of practice. For a safety risk, things that will need to be include the exact imminent and likely safety risk, the specific services being requested to address the safety risk, how the requested service will address the safety risk, and again, that documentation provided from a licensed professional within their scope of practice. If a budget modification request would be better suited for a different process, the care manager will contact the plan developer and request that they submit the documentation for that process instead. Here are two examples of a situation in which a person may be instructed to submit a different kind of documentation instead of a budget modification. A request for a change in condition would be indicated if a participant's needs have changed since their most recent assessment, and they're requesting a per diem level of supported living that is higher than the level they were assessed at for eligibility, or the total amount of supported living being requested meets or exceeds the amount for the higher level of support. An off-cycle verification might be indicated if a participant is identifying a need that is equivalent to those associated with levels M or B, and there has not been any change in the participant's needs since their last assessment. As a reminder, a participant's budget can also be modified to add in those health, safety, or employment services, but no specific budget modification form is required. Chapter 8 of the forthcoming traditional manual will provide a lot of detail around the service-specific requirements for these services, and we will also discuss those a little later in this training. Participants who are assigned to levels M or B who require 24 hours of one-to-one support will need to submit a budget modification request to obtain that level of support. Budget modification requests for discretionary services only need to include the documentation for the supports that are above the budget, not for all of the services being requested. A participant can request a budget modification for discretionary services that they would like to get in place of residential services that would be within budget. An example of this would be someone requesting adult day health services that are over budget, but they are not going to access the full amount of supported living that would be within or below their budget. In order for these requests to be approved, they must be shown to be the most cost-effective alternative. One last thing I'd like for us to go through before we take a short break is a little wrinkle that adds to the complication of the implementation of the new model, and that is the impact of the public health emergency and the American Rescue Plan. Because of COVID-19, we are still in a national public health emergency. We do not yet know when that date will end. The federal government provided states with extra money to provide supports and services because of the public health emergency, and that was through something known as the American Rescue Plan. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services put in place special rules because of the public health emergency. They also said that states can only keep the money from the American Rescue Plan if they take certain actions. All of these rules impact the way we will start to use the new budget model. Essentially, the rules around the American Rescue Plan say three things. The first is that a state cannot make it any harder to be found eligible for services than it was on April 1st, 2021. The second is that people must be able to keep getting the amount and type of services that they could receive on April 1st, 2021. Provider rates can also not go any lower than they were on that date. The department's still working with CMS to figure out exactly how that's going to impact implementation and exactly for how long. For now, the department thinks it means three things. The first is that everyone who is currently eligible for the DD program will remain eligible. The second is that new applicants who are found ineligible using the Vineland 3 will have the chance to be assessed using the SIBR. And third, that participants will have access to their current budget until all of the ARP requirements have been met, which the state currently projects as being in March of 2024. What this also means is that the budget notices are going to be a little more complicated for participants during this initial implementation. Annual budget notices will need to include both those budgets that were determined using the new model and the highest budget that was assigned between April 1st, 2021 and the implementation of the new budget model. For most participants, that amount will equal their current KW budget. However, these are being described as ARP budgets, as that is the reasons they are continuing moving forward. As you see in this excerpt from the new budget notice, the budget notice will include the person's advisory budget. It is then subdivided by the three categories in traditional, residential, discretionary, and planning supports. The total of these three numbers will equal the number here. Participants are then provided their ARP budget and told that it reflects the highest budget they were assigned between April 1st, 2021 and the date of implementation. A participant's assigned budget is then simply the higher of those two amounts. For some participants, the assigned budget will equal the ARP budget because that was higher than their new advisory budget. For other participants, the assigned budget will equal their advisory budget, as that is higher than their ARP budget. Notices for participants who self-direct will be very similar. The only major difference is that because the self-direction budgets are not subdivided into the three categories, they simply receive one number with their advisory budget, one number with their ARP budget, and then their assigned budget is the higher of those two. One last change we wanted to quickly describe is that the new eligibility and budget notices have been revised to account for the new model in hopes of also making them more understandable to participants. The new budget notices will include a variety of sections as well as a number of attachments. The first section will provide the person's eligibility decision, and there is an attachment with their Vineland 3 results that will be included. The second section details the budget decision and includes a description of how the support levels are decided and the person's Tscs results. There is also an attachment that describes how the advisory budget was decided and will include a copy of the model mix applicable for that participant. A section with the person's verification review decision will be included if that person selected to go through verification review. There's a section about how a person can request a budget modification, as well as an attachment which lists all of the health, safety, and employment services and provides the health and safety forms. A section on how a participant can submit a plan of service, which will vary for new participants and existing participants. And finally, a section with appeals information, including the document they need in order to submit an appeal request. With that, I am going to pause, ask for questions, and then give us a little break before we talk about the next key step, which is developing a plan.
We have one question that's come through the chat. Is there a maximum weekly number of hours for each service in the discretionary budget? For example, could a participant choose 40 hours a week of adult day health?
So the sub-limits within the budget have gone away to allow for participants to have greater flexibility. However, the requirement that a participant is able to utilize that budget and make that budget last for the entire plan year exists, as is the requirement that they can find a provider who is willing and able to provide that level of service. Participants must also still meet all of the prior authorization requirements as they always have, which is another limitation as to what kinds or amounts of service someone can receive. But sub-limits such as the current limit of 30 hours per week for a combination of adult day health, supported employment, and developmental therapy have gone away.
We have one that came through that says, I'm wondering how the participant's response when asked if they feel if they meet/need one-on-one level of care affects the decision/treatment. And I might ask for a little different clarification on that.
And we also can absolutely take this person off mute if they'd like to provide a little more clarification verbally, if that would be easier.
Yes, if the person that submitted that would like to raise their hand, I'd be happy to have that occur. While we're waiting on that response, so you may have talked about this, but how do TSCs bill for 4 hours if required to be in the SysA when TSCs typically get 2 hours per month for a client?
And Michael, that question actually also came up yesterday in the training we did. And we identified that we would take that back to the team and provide some additional clarification about what could or couldn't be billed for participating in the SysA. Is that something you would know offhand, or will we need to circle back on that?
We can circle back.
Okay.
And I am putting in the chat the link for the mychoicematters.idaho.gov email or website. There was a question about the link where send a link for the recordings. The recordings, once they're available, will be posted to the My Choice Matters website under the trainings tab. And I'm still not seeing a hand, Alina, so we can take a break and reach out to the person that asked the question, see if they would like to provide additional information.
Okay, that sounds good. Why don't we plan to reconvene here at either 2:40 or 3:40, depending on your time zone, just because we've got a lot more content still to get through in our next hour. See everyone back here in about 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, for typing that question into chat. So for folks who are not looking at the chat, the question previously asked was, in the previous section talking about the different levels, it was said that they asked participants during the assessment of level M and B if they feel like they need that level of care. Does that affect the decision made by the verification review team? Thank you for that question. Let me clarify. So during the assessment, so the Vineland 3, the Tscs, and the MSDA, a participant is asked if they would like to seek verification review. They're asked if they would like to seek verification review on the basis of whether or not they think they meet the criteria for level M or level B. Only those participants who wish to receive verification review will go through that process. Then, once those individuals who request that process will be given the verification questionnaire to complete describing their support needs, and will have a list of possible documentation they can submit to show that they meet that level of support need. The verification review team will then review those documents and determine whether or not the participant meets level M or level B. So a person's assertion as to what level of support they need is not the only factor that determines whether or not they go through verification review, but instead an identification by the respondents if they would like to seek verification review for the participant. Again, that is a question that's being asked to the respondents, who in most circumstances we believe will include the participant as one of the possible respondents, but in the event that individual is not there, that question will be asked of the two respondents who are responding on behalf of the participant. I also see another question that has come up about who will explain service mixes to new clients. Is that something you'd like to take, Michael?
Sure. So in the current system, when somebody is applying for services and they need assistance in understanding the services that are available or what's out there, our quality assurance staff are the ones that handle that. In the new process, they will also be the ones that handle these questions and help people to understand the mixes as they move forward, so that they know which to select.
I'll also note that Liberty assessors have been trained on the new model and have gotten instruction around the service mixes so they can help clarify and explain service mixes to participants during the assessment if needed, as determination of what service mix you would like to request is a part of being able to get to that budget. Any other questions that have come up for folks over our break before we dig into the rest of the presentation?
Not seeing any in the chat, and I am not seeing any raised hands.
All right. So we started by talking about the application and the change to the application. We then talked about the two new assessments that are in play under the new model, the Vineland 3 and the Sysa, and how those assessments are used to help determine eligibility and level of care, as well as how the Sysa is used to help get someone to a level. We then talked about how a participant gets to a service mix, because a service mix in combination with a support level is what helps get you to a budget. We've described how a model mix works and how the model mix for each level and mix is how the budget is arrived at. And we've talked about the ways that people can add to that budget using budget modifications. We've also identified the added complication that some old budgets are still in play due to the American Rescue Plan. So we are now to the third step in the process for most participants, developing a plan. The second portion of this training, which will be available in the coming weeks, is really where we dig into the process of plan development. We talk in great deal about the new ISP, additional questionnaires, the new costing sheets, and the costing sheets have changed a fair amount to respond to the new budget model. This is because there are more services to choose from, there's been a reduction in service-specific sublimits, and there is some flexibility to move things between budget components. A lot more detail about the plan development process, the costing sheets, and the ISP will be included in the Part 2 training. So just wanted to let you know that A lot more information on those topics is coming soon and can be made available very shortly. Once someone develops a plan, they then get that plan approved and start getting services. For a lot of folks, that's where the process ends until the next year. However, under the new model, there are some circumstances where someone needs to make a change to their plan or a change to their services, which could require them to go back to the process of developing a new plan. This is something known as a mid-year plan or a mid-year plan change, and there are 3 possible scenarios where this may come into play. The first is for those participants who have a change in condition, and as a result of that change in condition, are assigned to a new level and they will need to receive then a new prorated budget and will have to develop a new plan. Participants who have a service mix change will also receive a new prorated budget and will have to develop a new plan since budgets are tied to service mix. Participants who decline to go through verification review at the time of assessment, but later decide to go through that process, will also have to develop a new plan if they are assigned to a new level on the basis of verification review. So if they are assigned to levels M or B due to a verification at a time other than assessment. Plan addendums will still exist. They are simply limited to changes in how the dollars are allocated within the same level and the same service mix. Let's talk a little bit more about change in condition first. Participants may request a new assessment if there has been a change in their condition and the most recent assessment is no longer accurate. If a change in condition is requested, the plan developer will need to complete the change in condition request form and detail exactly what changes occurred. They'll also need to submit supporting documentation with that request to show how the condition has changed. Liberty will review the request and the documentation and determine if the information supports a new assessment being conducted. If it does, Liberty will then contact the individual and/or the support team to schedule a new assessment. After that assessment is complete, Liberty will send a new budget notice. If the change in condition results in a new support level, the plan developer will need to submit a new plan that will be prorated for the rest of that plan year. If the change in condition does not result in a new support level, then a new plan does not need to be submitted, as the level and the budget will remain the same. Here's an excerpt from the change in condition form. Across the top, you see basic contact information, then a request to describe the condition that has changed. Across the bottom, you'll also see a need to describe how the assessment does not reflect the current status of the participant, as well as the documents that are being submitted to substantiate that need for a change in condition or a need for a new assessment. The participant and their guardian, if applicable, then sign, and this form is submitted to the information coordinator. A service mix change occurs if a participant has not had a change in their condition, but their selected service mix no longer accurately describes their situation. This could be because they've chosen to change their living situation, so say move from supported living into a certified family home, or because they've selected to change their waiver option, so moving from traditional to self-direction or vice versa. The first step in that process is that Liberty will need to determine whether all of the necessary information is on file and whether the participant has a Sysa on file in order to complete the service mix change request. If a Sysa has been completed, then a service mix change can be completed using just a file review. If there's not a Sysa on file, the participant will need to be scheduled for a full assessment, which includes both the Vineland 3 and the Sysa. Liberty will complete the assessment and then mail out the new budget notice to the participant and or guardian, and a new prorated plan will need to be submitted to align with the participant's needs and their new situation. Here is a copy of the service mix change request form. Again, basic contact information across the top, a need to identify the participant has not received a Sysa and their living setting has changed, yes or no. You'll then need to identify the service mix change, both the service mix that's currently assigned and the requested service mix, and the participant and guardian, if appointed, will need to sign before submitting to the information coordinator. We understand that the concept of a service mix is fairly new, so it may be a little difficult for a participant to identify what is their currently assigned service mix, since that's a new concept to the model. However, in helping participants complete this form, the question is really, what type of residential habilitation are you receiving, if any? If a participant receives their residential habilitation from a certified family home provider, then they would select certified family home as their current service mix and would then identify the service mix they're requesting to move to. Participants who are not eligible to receive waiver services and are seeking to start receiving waiver services because they believe or already know themselves to be ICFID eligible would be in the state plan only service mix. Undetermined is included here, and this is applicable for participants who are brand new to the program and who at the time of the assessment were not able to identify what service mix they believed would apply once they were fully enrolled. While we highly suggest that participants identify a service mix at the time of the assessment to allow for an appropriate budget to be established, in the event that someone is not able to do so, they can continue the plan and a default service mix will be assigned to get them their initial budget notice. They would then need to submit a service mix change request to get a new budget notice to reflect the service mix that will actually apply when they begin receiving services. The third possible reason why someone may need a mid-year plan is due to an off-cycle verification request. Participants can request verification at any time. However, if a request is made more than 30 days after the assessment, Liberty will inquire if there has been a change in the participant's needs as their first step. If there has been a change in the participant's needs, they will be directed to complete a change in condition request instead of a verification request. If there has not been any change to the participant's needs, but instead the participant just identifies that they now would like to go through the process and have always had the same type of support need that would warrant inclusion in levels M or B, Liberty will send a notice requesting supporting documentation and completion of the verification questionnaire. If the verification review team finds the participant eligible for levels M and B, then the participant will receive a notice with a new budget, and they will then need to prepare a new prorated plan. If the verification review team finds the participant not eligible for levels M or B, the participant will receive a notice with that decision, but can keep their current service plan as they will have the same budget assigned and the same level assigned. Next, we're going to turn our attention to talking through some service-specific information, including changes to services and the criteria for a variety of services within the program. I want to check quickly if any questions have come in before we turn to that content.
I am not seeing any questions or any raised hands at this point.
Okay. So let's start with a quick overview of changes to traditional DD waiver services. We expect these changes to go into effect in June of 2022, but again, that is dependent upon CMS approval. First, we'll be adding 3 new services: Pre-Vocational Services, Career Planning, and Community Habilitation. There have also been changes to the supported living model, which allow for participants who have historically received 24-hour care to begin accessing discretionary services, which were previously disallowed by Idapa. The limit on the number of hours per week, which is currently listed at 30 hours per week for a combination of developmental therapy, adult day health, and supported employment, has been removed. So that limitation of 30 hours per week is no longer in play. Non-medical transportation is now an HCBS DD Estate Plan service, making it available to more participants. Unused service coordination units can now be rolled over during the remaining months of the plan. And plan development has been increased to a maximum of 12 hours per plan, up from 6 hours. Let's talk in a bit more detail about the changes to supported living. Currently, there are 3 types of supported living: hourly, high, and intense. As you all know, under current Idapa rules, adults on high or intense are precluded from using adult day health, developmental therapy, and non-medical transportation. Under the new model, adults who select supported living can utilize those services as well as a host of additional discretionary services. Under the new proposed daily rates, supported living accounts for less than 24 hours at most levels in order to offer participants a chance to obtain services from other providers if they would like. However, participants who still prefer to continue receiving supported living from the same provider 24/7 can do so by using their discretionary budget to purchase those additional supported living hours. As a reminder, here is a list of the full service array for participants on traditional. This is divided by the different components of the budget: residential, discretionary, and planning, as well as the list of services that are health, safety, or employment services and can be obtained outside of the budget by meeting the service-specific criteria. We're going to walk through each of these services, identifying any changes to the service if applicable, and we'll also detail any additional documentation requirements specifically for those health, safety, and employment services. We'll walk first through the estate plan services and then through the waiver services. The first service we're going to talk about is developmental therapy. The only change to this service is that the limitation on the number of hours per week has been removed. It remains a service intended for the instruction in daily living skills that the participant has not gained at a normal developmental stage. This must be referred by a physician or another practitioner of the healing arts. Developmental therapy evaluation remains a comprehensive development assessment of a specific skill set conducted by a qualified professional. It is limited to 4 hours per year, and this does not start over if the individual changes providers. A new DDA provider or the participant is expected to request the previous DT evaluation for use by the new DDA. Community habilitation is one of our new services and is intended to support a participant in their interests, goals, and needs related to community participation in an integrated setting. It promotes discovery and identification of skills, interests, as well as the potential for community contribution, socialization, peer interaction, and achievement of habilitative goals. This service can be provided only in an integrated setting in the community and in groups of no more than 3 participants. It is noted that group services should only be offered when the participants in the group have interest and goals that are so closely aligned that they can receive that service together, as it is the focus of the service for all participants in the group. Non-medical transportation enables participants to access DD Estate Plan, Waiver, and other community services. And the change to that service is that there is no longer a cap on the amount of service someone can receive, and it is now exist on the state plan versus on the waiver. Service coordination remains intended to monitor the plan, the services, and to assist with documentation throughout the plan year to meet the participants' goals and help monitor their progress. It's intended to link participants to services and supports as needed and remains limited to 4.5 hours per month. However, unused hours can be rolled over for the remaining months of a current plan of service. If a new plan needs to be submitted mid-year, those unused service coordination hours from the previous months do not roll over into the new plan. Plan development has not changed other than an increase to the number of hours available per plan, and it still is intended to assist the participant with running their person-centered planning meeting and to assess the participant's needs and services to meet those needs. Plan development is used to complete and submit the participant's individual service plan. And at any time where a new plan is submitted, the plan developer can request up to 12 hours for plan development activities. This can be requested by submitting a new plan developer authorization cover sheet. Crisis intervention services are limited to 20 hours during any 5-day period. There have been changes to this service, including a change in the submission timeline from 72 hours to 5 business days from the conclusion of providing the service. For crisis assistance from a service coordinator, since unused service coordinator units roll over to the remaining months of the plan, rollover units must be used prior to requesting crisis assistance. In order to receive this service, A request must be submitted to the information coordinator within the timeline listed above. Non-medical transportation for supported employment is simply transportation that is intended to help support competitive integrated employment. It is provided under the Health, Safety, and Employment Services, and any other kind of non-medical transportation must be requested from the Discretionary Supports budget. Additional documentation required to receive this service as an employment service is the name and location of employment, the address the participant needs transportation to and from, as well as the hours and general schedule of the participant in order to know the frequency of transportation needed. Now let's move into our waiver services. The first is Residential Habilitation Certified Family Home. There has been no change to this service. It remains available for participants who reside in a CFH and receive supports in their home and in the community. It's intended to learn independent living skills and to receive supervision as necessary, and these services are paid at a daily per diem, which accounts for 6.25 hours of habilitative support and 24-hour general supervision. Alone time can be requested on the CFH questionnaire and submitted as a part of the ISP or an addendum, or can be submitted on a standalone request form, which will be described in more detail during part 2 of this training. Supported living remains a service that's provided by a supported living agency in the participant's home and community. It's intended to help learn independent living skills and to receive supervision as necessary. Participants using the service can live with or without roommates, and this service can be provided as a daily per diem, at an hourly per unit rate, or as a combination of a daily per unit rate and additional services at a per unit rate. People can use a combination of various rates to accommodate variations in that day-to-day schedule. An example of such is that Amanda is assigned to level 2 and has a supported living service mix. Monday through Friday, she chooses to use her level 2 per diem and discretionary budget for a combination of adult day health, developmental therapy community, and developmental therapy center. On Saturdays, however, Amanda chooses to use her per diem and add 6 additional hours of supported living in order to cover her full day. On Sundays, Amanda uses 12 hours of group supported living, but then checks out of services for 12 hours in order to do activities with her family. In this example, the participant is using all 3 different options of using supported living: a regular per diem on Monday through Friday, a per diem with an additional per unit services on Saturdays, and just per units on Sundays, as she is checking out for a majority of the day. This slide provides a little more detail about how the new per diems are comprised. Level 1 is a per diem that accounts for 14 hours a day of group support. Level 2 is a per diem that accounts for 18 hours a day of group support. Level 3 accounts for 12 hours per day of group support and 6 hours per day of individual support. And level M and B per diem accounts for 16 hours a day of individual support and 8 hours a day of group support. Participants can add additional hours to the per diem dependent on the number of hours that are included in that per diem. There's also a limit to being able to bill the per diem based on the number of hours that are included. So for example, a participant who chooses the level 1 per diem can add up to 10 hours per day per unit for supported living. However, a provider must provide 10 hours of level 1 in order to bill the per diem. A participant at level 2 can receive up to 6 additional hours per day of supported living on top of the per diem, and a provider must provide at least 12 hours in order to bill the per diem. At level 3, the same applies. Participants can add up to 6 hours a day of per unit supported living, and a provider can only bill the per diem if they have been providing at least 12 hours of that service. The per unit rates are available on an individual, group, or a 2-to-1 staffing basis, but 2-to-1 staffing is approved on a case-by-case basis only in special situations. A little more on the M&B per diem. As you noticed, only the M&B per diem accounts for a 24-hour day. Participants who want to receive a different amount of supported living than the per diem provides should not utilize that per diem. They can instead choose a different level per diem. They could also select a specific combination of one-on-one or group supported living as needed. A participant cannot use the M or B per diem if they are receiving 4 hours or more of another discretionary service in a day, or if they are out of supported living services for more than 6 hours in a day. Participants can use a combination of the M&B per diem and per unit supported living to account for days that they do not qualify to utilize that per diem. Participants who are going to be receiving supported living and who plan to use a variety of services within a given day will need to develop a plan for how their needs will be met if there is a last-minute change in their schedule. For example, if someone stays home sick for a day. Plans for such circumstances could include things like utilizing approved alone time, using natural supports, or receiving support from the supported living provider during that time. If there is a longer-term change in how much support a participant will receive from the supported living provider, that may require a plan addendum. For example, if Livia breaks her leg, she's then going to be receiving all of her supports in her home for 8 weeks, instead of going to the DDA as originally planned, a plan addendum would be required. We encourage service coordinators to guide planning teams through thinking through all of the possible scenarios where a short-term change might occur and how to develop a service plan that can accommodate those needed changes. The next service we'll walk through is Adult Day Health. The only change to this service is that the limitation on the number of hours per week has been removed. It is still provided outside the home, the participant in a community-based setting, and is intended to encompass health service, social services, recreation, and supervision. Pre-vocational services include providing learning and work experiences, can include volunteer work, and any circumstance where a participant can develop general, non-job task-specific strengths that can contribute to their employability in a paid employment in an integrated setting. It can include habilitative goals, such as building attention span, motor skills, or interpersonal relationship skills. It is limited to 520 hours, which can be accessed over 2 plan years, but do not need to be consecutive. It can be offered on an individual basis or on a group basis for up to 4 participants. Career planning is our third new service, and it is a focused and time-limited service specific at providing consultation, evaluation, and assistance to participants to attain or advance their goals around competitive integrated employment. It's limited to 4 hours per week and is offered only as an individual service. There's been no change to the respite care service. It is still intended to provide short-term breaks from caregiving responsibilities to non-paid caregivers. Chore services have also not changed. They are still intended to provide services as necessary to maintain a sanitary and safe environment when no one in the home, including the participant, is able to perform those tasks physically or financially. It is limited to those services where the home is rented or owned by the participant and can only be provided to participants in the service mix of community-only supports. In the case of a home that is rented, it will need to be determined whether or not the landlord is responsible under the lease to maintain the property in a way that would preclude Chore services. No change has been made to the skilled nursing service, and in order to add this service to a plan under a health, safety, or employment service, the additional documentation needed is a nursing plan of care. This service also must be referred by a physician or another practitioner of the healing arts in order to be approved. Specialized medical equipment and supplies have also not changed. It includes devices, controls, or appliances to enable the participant to increase their ability to perform activities of daily living or to control or communicate within their home environment, and includes medically necessary equipment that is not covered under other insurance plans. In order to include this service, documentation is needed to show a denial of durable medical equipment from the medical care unit, except for the following items: diverter valves for bathtubs, eating or feeding utensils, lift devices or wheelchair lifts for vans, as well as a letter from a physician recommending the specialized medical equipment, how it is related to the person's disability, and the reason why it is being recommended. No change has been made to the Environmental Accessibility Adaptation Service. It still includes minor housing adaptations, which are necessary to enable the participant to function with greater independence in the home. Permit modifications are limited to homes that are owned by the participant or a non-paid family member, and portable or non-stationary modifications can be made when such modifications can follow the participant to their next place of residence. Additional documentation necessary to obtain the service is evidence that the home is owned by the participant or a non-paid family, a letter from the physician recommending the adaptation and how it is related to the participant's disability, and at least 2 quotes from a Medicaid provider, which include the work to be done and the total cost, including itemized labor and supplies. There's been no change to behavior consultation. It remains a service to provide direct consultation and clinical evaluation of participants who are experiencing or may be expected to experience a psychological, behavior, or emotional crisis. It can include providing training to staff around the needs of the participant or providing emergency backup to a participant in crisis. Documentation explaining the participant is experiencing a psychological, behavioral, or emotional crisis is needed to include this service on the plan. Home delivered meals also have not changed and can include 1 to 2 meals per day to a participant who rents or owns their own home, is alone for significant portions of the day, has no caregiver for extended periods, and is unable to prepare a meal without assistance. You'll need to show documentation that a participant rents or owns their own home. Personal emergency response systems have also not changed. They remain an electronic device to enable the participant to secure help in an emergency. The service is limited to those participants who rent or own their own home or live with an unpaid caregiver, who are alone for a significant portion of the day, who have no caregiver for extended periods, and who would otherwise require extensive routine support. You'll need to show evidence that the participant rents or owns their own home and that they have the skills necessary to use the PERS unit. Transition services have also not changed. There remains goods and services that enable a participant to exit a nursing facility, hospital, IMD, or ICFID in order to transition to community-based settings. They are only available to participants who are currently receiving the transition management benefit and are limited to $2,000 every 2 years and can only be used when expenses cannot be met from another source. In order to obtain the service, we recommend you begin by referring to the Idaho Home Choice Program. Support and employment is also not changed. It remains a support to enable a participant to work in an integrated setting and requires supported employment plan in order to be approved. Next steps to be aware of include planning to attend one of the Part 2 trainings for service coordinators. These will be held on May 3rd, May 6th, and May 13th. We also ask that you please respond to a very short survey about this training. This will offer an opportunity for you to identify additional areas of additional information you may need or other suggestions on how the training can be improved. We'll be training a variety of individuals and a variety of different stakeholder groups over the coming months, and would love your feedback to make this as effective and useful as possible ahead of the implementation of the new model. We also ask that you please share information about the upcoming trainings that are available to participants and families with your networks. The full list of trainings with links is now available on the My Choice Matters site under the Trainings and Information tab, and we want to be sure that as many individuals and families as possible get a chance to attend one of the many trainings specifically directed to them to get acquainted with the new model ahead of implementation. With that, I will open it up for questions for our remaining 15 minutes.
So we've had a couple of questions come through the chat. Which provider types can provide community habilitation, pre-vocational services, and career planning.
Career planning and pre-vocational services can be provided by employment providers currently, and community habilitation can be provided by supported living providers and DDA providers.
Will non-medical transportation for supported employment need to go through MTM to schedule with the transportation provider? And I think that one I would need to go back and double check on.
I can answer that question,
Oh,
Michael.
perfect, Andrea.
So MTM is who you schedule for non-emergency medical transportation. So that's for transportation to developmental therapy or to medical appointments. So the transportation for supported employment, that is non-medical transportation, and they're easy to confuse just because of the names. But those do not need to be scheduled through MTM. Those are scheduled through the non-medical transportation provider, whether that's the agency or a commercial provider.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, that makes total sense. There's a question I'm not sure I understand regarding supported living services and using discretionary supports budget. Does that mean a participant can only have 24/7 supported living services only if they don't want discretionary services?
So what that means is that it is only possible to obtain service from one provider at a time. So a participant who would like to receive 24/7 supported living, say on Saturdays and Sundays, would simply utilize a portion of their discretionary dollars to purchase additional units of supported living on Saturdays and Sundays. Then they would get their regular per diem Monday through Friday for whatever level of supported living was relevant for them, and then could purchase, using their discretionary dollars, other kinds of discretionary services to fill the other hours in their day. It truly is intended to be as flexible as possible to allow optimal choice for participants to create service plans that are going to meet their unique goals and needs.
And we have a question about, is the slide presentation posted anywhere online for later reference?
I checked right before this training, and I do not believe these slides are yet on the My Choice Matters site, but they will be there shortly under the Trainings and Information tab. The recordings, as well as just the slides themselves, will all be made available for future reference.
And again, that was placed in the chat earlier. It's mychoicematters.idaho.gov.
I've also added to the chat the link to the survey following this training so people can access it more easily.
Thank you. And then there is one final question. Any efforts being made to increase providers' available services? I'm assuming that's to increase the number of providers available to provide the services. The work that we're doing with rates, and of course, we've opened this up for provider enrollment, and we do have providers enrolling to provide the new services. We have already had providers across the state enrolling for this, for the new services.
We'll also, in the presentations and trainings that are specifically targeted to employment providers, to supported living providers, to DDA providers, we'll highlight the available new services for those provider types and identify exactly how they can go about enrolling to become a provider for those additional services, to also make sure everyone's aware of the ability to add on those new services to the array that they offer.
And I'm not seeing any additional questions or any raised hands. Oh, hold on, might have one more. We're good.
All right, well, assuming folks don't have any other questions.
The one other question that just came up was, are they printable? And yes, the slide deck will be printable. You'll be able to download that from the My Choice Matters website.
Another thing to note is that very shortly, the new manual, both the traditional manual and the self-direction manual, will be available, in which we'll have a lot of information about the new model, service requirements, etc., a lot of information that is covered in this presentation and will be covered in the next presentation. So again, keep on the lookout on My Choice Matters. As new materials become available, they'll be posted there. And I know the department's working very hard to get those things ready and out for folks to be able to start looking at.
Not seeing any additional questions at this point, Alina. So just again, please do utilize the link in the chat to complete the survey for this training. Nothing additional.
All right. Well, I'm going to thank you all for attending this training today, and we look forward to seeing you for part 2. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.